I've always liked working as a babysitter. It was easy money, and I always got along with children. That night, I was called to take care of two brothers, Lucas and Sophia, 6 and 4 years old. The parents seemed nice to me and left simple instructions. The children were already fed, they just needed help brushing their teeth and going to bed. The house was spacious and well lit, so, although I had never been there before, I didn't feel uncomfortable. Around 9 p.m., the little ones were already asleep, and I settled on the sofa in the living room, watching TV with the family dog lying at my feet. Everything was quiet, until I heard a noise coming from upstairs. At first, I thought the children had woken up, maybe gone to the bathroom. But when I went up and looked through the doorway, I saw that they were both deeply asleep. I went back to the living room, thinking I could have imagined. But a few minutes later, I heard again low beats, followed by something that looked like a whisper. The dog, who until then slept next to me, raised his ears and went to the stairs, stopping in the middle of the steps. He stood there, motionless, staring at the darkness of the upstairs corridor. A chill went up my spine. Something in the way he watched the emptiness made me restless. I decided to go up again, this time with the dog following me closely. I walked slowly down the corridor, trying to hear any sound that confirmed my suspicion. I reached the door of the children's room and took a peek. Nothing. The only noise was their quiet breathing. It was then that I felt a chill run down the back of my neck, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Something made me look at the window. The curtain was slightly open, and in the glass, I saw a reflection. My heart raced. There was a shadow outside, motionless. My body froze for a few seconds. The light of the pole on the street was weak, and the figure seemed distorted, almost a dark blur against the darkness. I swallowed dry, taking a step back without taking my eyes off the window. The dog began to growl low, as if he had also noticed. I didn't want to scare the children, so I left the room as quietly as possible and hurried down the stairs. My hands were shaking when I picked up my cell phone and called the children's parents. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I couldn't hide my nervousness. I told them what was happening, and they said they would come back immediately. I stood close to the front door, keeping the dog by my side. He was still restless, his back hair bristling, growling low towards the stairs. My heart was pounding in my chest. What should I do? Lock all the doors and windows? Pick up the kids and run away? But where to? The figure I saw was outside, but what if it was already inside the house? The thought made me shiver. I decided to check the security panel near the door. When I looked at him, I felt a chill in my stomach. The alarm was deactivated. It didn't make sense. The children's parents had mentioned that he was always on at night. Every second of waiting seemed like an eternity. I kept the phone in my hand, ready to call the police if I heard anything suspicious. The dog suddenly started barking, running towards the living room. I ran after him, my heart racing, but when I got there, everything seemed normal. The curtains were closed, the door locked. Even so, something seemed wrong. That's when I noticed. One of the chairs on the dining table was slightly away, as if someone had been there. But I was absolutely sure that I hadn't touched her. My mind tried to find logical explanations, but my body was already reacting to the pure instinct of fear. I pulled the dog back and ran upstairs, where the children were still sleeping soundly. I closed the door to their room, locked it and leaned against it, trying to control my breathing. The cell phone was shaking in my hand as I typed a message for my parents, saying that something strange was happening. They visualized almost at the same time, and replied that they were coming back as soon as possible. I tried to calm down, but the silence of the house seemed to scream around me. Minutes later, I heard a subtle noise coming from the ground floor. A long creaking, as if someone was pushing the kitchen door very slowly. My blood frosted. The dog began to growl softly, his ears pointed at the door. I held the doorknob tightly, without the courage to leave there to check. So steps. Clear, slow, heavy. They were approaching the stairs. I closed my eyes for a moment, praying that it was just my imagination. But the sound continued, one step at a time, going up. I held my breath, listening to each step approaching. The dog next to me was motionless. Only the bristly hairs denounced that he also felt something wrong. When the steps reached the last step, silence suddenly returned. There was no more sound. No breathing, no movement. Just that overwhelming emptiness on the other side of the door. I stood there, motionless, waiting for something to happen. Seconds seemed like hours. So, the most subtle noise possible, the doorknob being tested very slowly. My heart raced. I held the cell phone with trembling hands and called the children's parents. As soon as I heard the mother's voice answer, I whispered, "There's someone here." She was silent for a moment, and then said in a tone of urgency, "We are coming." The dog growled softly, his eyes fixed on the door. I didn't know what to do. If I ran, I could run into whoever it was. If she stayed there, she could be cornered. The silence continued, but the feeling of being observed was unbearable. I stood there, paralyzed, while the dog kept his gaze fixed on the door. The doorknob didn't move anymore, and the steps stopped, but the feeling that someone was still there was suffocating. So one detail gave me goosebumps: the house alarm never went off. How could someone have entered without activating it? My instinct screamed for me to pick up the children and leave, but my feet seemed stuck to the ground. Minutes later, headlights illuminated the entrance of the house. The parents arrived and rushed in. As soon as I saw their worried faces, I collapsed in words, explaining what had happened. The father, without saying anything, went straight to the security panel. What he said next made my blood freeze. The alarm was deactivated at 10:47 p.m. I looked at the clock. It was 11:10 p.m. Whoever it was, he had been inside the house with me for at least 20 minutes, and I never saw anyone. Whenever I remember that night, I feel a chill in my spine. I was taking care of a 5-year-old boy in an isolated house in the countryside. Your parents were super kind and gave me all the instructions before leaving, but right from the start, I noticed something strange in that house. Everything was very calm, even too much, as if time passed in a different way there. After I put the boy to sleep, I decided to relax a little by watching a movie. I was there, in the living room, completely alone, or at least I thought I was. That's when I heard a noise coming from upstairs, followed by the characteristic sound of the boy's bedroom door opening. I thought it was him going to the bathroom, so I got up and went to the room. The corridor was silent, and the night light illuminated the path a little. When I opened the door to his room, I found the bed empty and everything in silence. The boy wasn't there. Scared, I ran to the bathroom, but there was no sign of him. My first reaction was to go back to the room and try to calm down, thinking I had deceived myself. But, as soon as I settled on the couch again, I heard the sound of the bedroom door opening again. The same sound, clear and crisp. That's when panic began to dominate me. I got up quickly, but this time, the feeling was different. The silence was dense, and something told me that I was not alone in the house. My heart was beating fast as I climbed the stairs cautiously. The dim light of the hallway lamp didn't help much, but I needed to make sure the boy was okay. When I got close to the room, I looked through the gate in the door. The room was empty again, and the sound of the door opening seemed to have been a reflection of my mind, playing a trick on me. But then, when I turned to leave, I saw something that made me freeze. A shadow projected on the corridor wall, coming from the basement, and seemed to move. Fear took over me, and the fact that nothing explained what was happening made me question the sanity of the situation. I then decided to go down to the basement, not really knowing what I was looking for or what I expected to find. The basement door was locked, which didn't surprise me, but something told me that I should open it. That's when I pushed her slowly, a cold breeze hit me, and there, at the bottom of the darkness, I saw something that made my bones freeze. The boy was there, standing still, completely motionless, with his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. He didn't seem scared, just waiting. I called his name in a whisper, but he didn't answer. The silence that took over the environment was unbearable. I moved forward slowly, not knowing what to do, not understanding how he ended up there. The boy was standing still, as if he was waiting for something to happen. There was no other sound than my heart racing, and the slight pop of the wooden floor under my feet. When I got close to him, I could see the expression on his face. It was an empty expression, as if he were in a trance. I asked again what he was doing there, but he didn't answer. He just pointed to the back of the room, to a dark corner where there was absolutely nothing. My mind began to spin, trying to understand what was happening, but the answer never came. I was taken by a growing panic, and when trying to touch him to take him back upstairs, the boy finally looked at me, with his eyes completely devoid of emotion. "I can't leave here," he said, and the way he said that made me tremble. He seemed to know something I didn't know, as if he was trapped in that house, in that situation. The urge to scream took over me, but a part of me told me to keep him calm. I took a deep breath and, without saying anything else, I took him by the hand and led him back to the stairs. When we reached the top of the stairs, the tension in the air seemed even denser. The whole house was too quiet, which only made everything look even weirder. I knew something was very wrong, but the but I couldn't point out what exactly. The boy seemed calm now, as if nothing had happened, but I was still panicking. I took him back to the room, trying to do my best to look calm, even if he was about to collapse inside. Just a few minutes later, I heard the sound of the bedroom door opening again. I almost jumped in fright, and my body stiffened instantly. The feeling of being observed became even stronger, and I didn't know what to think anymore. I looked at the corridor, and didn't see anything. No figure, no movement. Just the silence, that deep silence that left me with the feeling that I was being watched, that something or someone was right there waiting. I looked at the room where the boy was, and saw him lying on the bed, now with his eyes closed, as if he were fast asleep. But there was something wrong, something I couldn't identify. The bedroom door was half open, enough to give me that strange feeling that something else was happening there, something I couldn't understand. I decided I needed to talk to the boy's parents, so I called them, desperate, explaining what was happening. They took a few minutes, but when they finally answered, the father's voice was calm, almost as if he was used to something like that. "Is everything okay there? Is he sleeping? The house can be a little strange at times, but nothing to worry about." I almost screamed on the phone, but I held back. "No, you don't understand. There's something wrong here. The boy, the secret door. What's going on in this house?" He seemed in no hurry to reassure me, which only increased my discomfort. "Relax. I'll talk to you as soon as we arrive. Stay calm." That answer did nothing but increase my dread. I looked at the boy, who was still lying in bed, with his eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. He was too calm, too perfect. The kind of calm that only a child could maintain in a completely abnormal situation. Something in his expression left me with a lump in my throat, as if he knew something I didn't know. That's when I heard a noise coming from downstairs. It seemed as if someone was dragging something weighing around the house. It was a low, muffled sound, but clear enough for me to distinguish. My stomach turned in horror, and I hesitated for a moment, but then the need to understand what was happening pushed me to the stairs. I went down with my heart racing, each step sounding louder than the previous one. When I reached the end of the stairs, the sound suddenly stopped, leaving a frightening silence in the air. I looked around, trying to find any sign of something, any movement that could give me a clue of what was happening, but the house seemed empty. The air was heavy, as if the space itself was trying to hide something. The basement door was now a little ajar, and my mind began to go crazy with the possibilities. The door that once looked like a simple entrance for storage, now looked like a passage to something much more sinister. I hesitated for a moment, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that the boy was waiting for something or someone downstairs. How could he be so calm after everything that happened? As if he knew that everything was out of place, but that there was no reason to panic. When I opened the door, there he was, standing at the bottom of the basement, in a dark corner, looking at me with an empty expression. He was motionless, as if he had been intentionally placed there. His face, so familiar and innocent, now looked different, darker, more distant. He didn't say anything, he just watched me in silence. I almost fell backwards, but something prevented me from running away. The feeling that I was doing something wrong, that my presence there had invaded something that should not be moved, paralyzed me. I tried to talk, ask what he was doing there, but my throat was tight. The words just didn't come out. The boy just looked at me, still in silence, as if challenging me to do something. I took a deep breath and finally said his name, trying to keep him calm, but he didn't answer or move. That's when I realized that the place was strange. There was no longer that smell of old house that the basement had, but something else, something metallic, a feeling of heavy air that made me want to run from there as soon as possible. That's when I realized that the basement door was closing slowly, by itself, as if something or someone was pushing on the other side. A chill ran down my spine. I looked at the boy again. He still didn't move, but now his eyes seemed emptier than ever. I took courage and took a step towards him, but when the door closed completely, the basement light went out. I was in total darkness, and my heart raced. That's when I ran to the stairs and went back to the top floor, but I didn't know what to do. When I rang at the phone, my body was shaking. I called his parents without knowing what to say, but the call didn't seem to make sense. All I could do was wait until they arrived, and when they finally arrived, still nervous, I explained everything that had happened. But when I went down again, when I got to the basement, the door was locked and seemed to have never been opened. They didn't find anything. No secret door, no sign of who was there, just the empty place. The boy was in bed, sleeping soundly, as if nothing had happened. They looked at me as if I was inventing everything, as if it were some horror story, but I knew what I had seen, what I heard, what I felt. I never went back to that house. And to this day, what happened that night haunts me. I still wonder, who was in that basement? What did the boy know that I didn't know? And more importantly, why didn't any of that seem real when the parents arrived? I've always been skeptical about these ghost stories and things like that. I've been working as a babysitter for years, and I've always taken care of small children, so nothing really scared me. But it all changed that night. I was called to take care of a teenager, Marcos, in an isolated house in the mountains. His parents were traveling, and he was alone. He seemed to be calm, despite spending most of his time playing on his cell phone. When he told me a story about a person who had disappeared in the region years ago, I didn't pay much attention. I thought it was just another one of those children's stories, something he had heard in some movie or at school. However, something strange started to happen after that. We were in the living room, me watching TV and him still playing. Suddenly, the living room door closed by itself. I thought it was the wind, so I went there and checked all the windows. There was nothing, but the air seemed colder than usual. When I returned to the sofa, the sound of a scratch on the wall made me jump. I looked at Marcos, but he was absorbed in the game. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But as the night progressed, the sounds began to become more frequent, and the weather in the house became more and more oppressive. Later, when Marcos went to sleep, I was alone in the living room, trying to ignore the strange feeling that house caused me. I took the remote control to change the channel, but before I could choose something, I heard a high-pitched sound cutting the silence. It was a phone ringing. At first, I thought it was the TV, but the sound clearly came from the kitchen. I went there, a little hesitant, and saw an old landline hanging on the wall. The display was off, but the device kept playing. I attended, my heart racing. "Hello," my voice came out more trembling than I would like. Nothing. Just a heavy silence on the other side of the line, followed by a low noise, as if someone was breathing very slowly. My stomach turned, and I immediately turned it off. I tried to convince myself that it could be a defect in the device, but my restlessness only increased. I went back to the living room, but I couldn't relax anymore. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. They weren't Marcos's heavy steps, but something lighter, more careful, as if someone were walking on tiptoe. My chest tightened. I sat still, listening to those steps approaching. I looked at the corridor, expecting to see Marcos leaving the room, but the door to his room remained closed. Then, out of nowhere, the phone rang again. This time my whole body crashed. The phone ringing in the kitchen, and those steps in the hallway. It didn't make sense. I forced myself to get up, even feeling every muscle in my body tense. I walked slowly to the kitchen, the phone still ringing shrill. When I reached out to answer, he stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I stood there, taking a deep breath, trying to calm down, until I heard another sound, a creaking coming from the back door. My heart raced. I had locked all the doors when Marcos's parents left. I ran there, and the doorknob was still in place, the key turned. But something was wrong. The carpet that was at the entrance was folded, as if someone had passed by. Suddenly, I felt a chill going up the back of my neck. Behind me, in the living room, the sofa where I was sitting before creaking, as if someone had just gotten up from it. I turned around quickly, hoping to see Marcos, but the room was empty. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. My instinct screamed for me to take my things and get out of there, but I couldn't leave Marcos alone. I took my cell phone, ready to call his parents, when a notification made me stop. It was a message from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "Did you see?" I took the cell phone harder, my sweaty hands slipping on the screen while I stared at that message. "Did you see?" What? Who would send something like that? My first instinct was to answer, to ask who it was, but something made me hesitate. If I gave any sign that I had seen the message, I would be getting involved in something I didn't understand. Instead, I deleted the notification and tried to stay calm. I took a deep breath and convinced myself that it could be just a prank from Marcos. He seemed to like these stories. Maybe he wanted to scare me. I went up the stairs slowly, my heart still racing, and stopped at the door of his room. Everything was quiet. The boy slept deeply, his breathing light and rhythmic. If it were him, I would have heard some noise, laughter, anything. But no. I went back to the living room, feeling more alert than ever. I checked all the door and window locks, checked if there was nothing strange in the rooms. Everything seemed normal. I almost managed to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, until the phone rang again. But this time, the sound didn't come from the kitchen. It came from above, from upstairs. and I knew there wasn't any other phone working in that house. My feet froze in place, my breath became short. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I went up the stairs slowly, trying to control my breathing. The phone sound had stopped, but that sudden silence was even worse. I walked down the corridor towards Marcos's room and leaned my ear against the door. Nothing. Not a sound. I opened it slowly and looked inside. He slept deeply, breathing slowly and rhythmically. I sighed with relief, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. I went back to the room, trying to think of some logical explanation. Maybe I had heard some noise and misinterpreted it, but then something made me stop. The landline of the house was on the wall, in the same place as before. But now his cable was loose. He wasn't connected to the line. I was paralyzed, staring at the phone. How could he have played if he wasn't connected? My stomach turned. I wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't just leave Marcos alone. I went back to the couch, trying to ignore the cold in my stomach and convince myself that I was just tired. But sleep didn't come. When Marcos's parents arrived in the morning, I made sure to act normally. I didn't want to look paranoid, but before leaving, I casually commented on the phone. His father frowned. This phone hasn't worked for years. I don't even know why I haven't thrown it away yet. My heart raced. I didn't say anything else. I took my things and left, with the uncomfortable feeling that night, I attended something I should never have called.